Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucia Gomez, and I am your host today on Critica NYC. We're having an esteemed panel of two individuals that I'm really happy to call friends and colleagues in the movement, and definitely really fascinating to hear about some of their experiences in the last 8 years of de Blasio and what they consider to be the future of an administration of Mayor Eric Adams and a brand new city council. And so I look forward to having this discussion. I look forward to thinking through a couple of the strategies and the information that we should all be looking out for as we engage in this conversation. And so I definitely want to invite Eli Valentin, a political strategist, to speak with us today, as well as Camille Rivera, who is a partner at New Deal Strategies. You know, we're going to have to really begin to have a conversation about, you know, what does our community need in order to thrive, right? Do we need more community partners? Do we need more housing? Do we need, more members within the city council or within any elected body? Or do we need more appointments in higher policymaking positions? Do we need a citywide elected? You know, we're talking about, 4 years from now, where we're going to have we're going to have an opportunity, what I mean about brand new opportunity to run candidates for citywide office, knowing that we just had individuals elected into citywide. We're going to see Comptroller-elect Brad Lander enter. He's a city council member from Brooklyn currently. We're going to still have Jomani Williams as our public advocate. And, as much as we can have a little bit of a conversation of what we see within the public advocate's office. And we'll have Mayor-elect Eric Adams, currently the borough president, out in Brooklyn. We're going to have a Latino Brooklyn borough president with Antonio Reynoso. We'll have a new borough president in Manhattan by the name of Mark Levine, a sitting council member, as well as Antonio Reynoso, sitting council member. And then we'll have a borough president, Vanessa Gibson, in the Bronx, right, sitting councilwoman from the area of Highbridge. And we'll have borough president from Queens, Donovan Richards, and he was a council member, and so he just got elected. So we're gonna have a Staten Island borough president. Oh, and if you ask me right now, I don't remember. I forgot what his name is. But we'll have a new Staten Island borough president. That was a shocker for so many. So lots to discuss. And then the question is, what's to celebrate for the Latino community? We're just right in the midst still of a pandemic, and the surges that have been going around in the last couple of weeks. And so we need to look sharply at what 2022 has to hold, has in store for us. And so, I want to, if Eli Valentin is currently on, want to make sure that Eli joins us in the conversation. Hi, Eli, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Could be better, right? I think all of us, I would tell you the nonstop discussions on Twitter around the hours of time people are waiting to take COVID tests is really, it's bombarding me a little bit. And then I felt it when I had to go twice in the last week to get tested. And I'm talking about like 4 hours. I'm like, if I don't have COVID, I'm definitely going to have a flu after this, because it was freezing outside. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's been rough. So anyway, hi, Camille. How are you?
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you? How's it going?
I'm okay. I could definitely feel you on the COVID stuff. Having previously had COVID and then having to deal with Omicron, even going outside, it's a very kind of eerie feeling, as almost if you're back in 2019. So I definitely feel like how our community must be so nervous. I was actually just at an event where workers who have been fighting for one fair wage, who are just paid by the tip, and who are largely Latino immigrant communities, the back end workers, and they're feeling it. They're all getting sick, and it's a scary thing.
Listen, I'm feeling it firsthand here at home. So I've literally been home for a week without leaving. And it's not a good start, I would say, for 2022, honestly. Definitely not a good feeling, but hopefully we'll be able to come out of this again, even though we never got out of it, right? We got a little bit of I would say, a little bit of a thought, right? An idea that we'll be able to be unmasked and in public spaces. And you know what? We took too much advantage of that, and now we're back at home. At least I am for the next couple of weeks. So let's talk a little bit about what's been going on. And how about we have a little bit of a discussion about the last 8 years? What are some highlights? And I'll start with you, Camille, because you started, some of your time in the last 8 years was within the administration. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Slightly. And then, what are some of the highlights or takeaways?
PTSD you're trying to give me at the end of the year.
Yeah, and that will cause me some, coughing. Go ahead.
I think, the total 8 years of the de Blasio administration, what I believe in the beginning was a real mix. I started as the deputy commissioner for homeless services when I would join the administration, and I definitely joined with this feeling of a new vision and an excitement. Right, it was post Bloomberg. Right, we were thinking about the tale of two cities, how we were going to be able to eliminate poverty, how we were going to be able to decrease homelessness and allow for opportunities. And what we found was a very convoluted space of how people deal with social services, which was to basically hide every single aspect of it. And the more you open the books and created transparency, the almost kind of like the shocker that, oh my God, well, now it's your problem, right? You can't really continue to blame the previous administration. You have to own it. I do believe that there are some things in particular for the Latino community that the mayor definitely did. I think COVID, although he talks about universal pre-K, which I think is one of his biggest legacies, I think that the COVID stuff is his legacy. And I think despite the governor's big press conferences every day that everybody got excited, including myself, getting gaslighted by them, the mayor's press conferences, although boring, were absolutely what we needed in terms of ensuring that less people died and less people got infected. And his team kind of went into overdrive to be able to support that. And I'm sure we all saw what was happening in places like Elmhurst and Elmhurst Hospital and others that slowly but surely got under control. And that support, I think he saved a lot of lives. And I think we do have to give him that credit, and particularly for the Latino community. I worry that the celebration is very obviously very bittersweet, right? I think it's hard to celebrate when you're in a time of not only mourning, but also at a time of like the city's in its survival mode. And I think that every time, as you said, Lucia, there's a moment of space or brevity where you're like, oh my goodness, like that you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. This virus has more plans for the human race than we would like it to have. And so I think for the Latino community, the one thing that I would say is, it's not necessarily what's to celebrate, what is to like really hone in on, because I think the what's to come for the Latino community in particular, as we just went through the speaker's race for the city council, as we've seen that there isn't a citywide elected in office, we do have to do better about what are the messages that are resonating with the Latino community, and how can we harness those messages and make sure that we're not just ideology, which is I'm a progressive, everybody knows that, but at the same time, how does the message resonate around making sure that there is some sort of voice within the Latino community that we can speak to as a whole?
Wow. Camille, I have so many questions and I wrote so many notes, but I'm going to get to them. I swear I am. I'm going to ask you like kind of the same question from the perspective of what did you see as his greatest legacy, right? Camille talked about universal pre-K. I think the mayor doesn't stop talking about universal pre-K. He won't stop talking about minimum wage, even though he didn't really do it, but I get it, the level that he played. And she spoke about COVID. What have you seen to be some of the things that, at least for the Latino community, we will remember him by?
Well, I think we should also acknowledge his role with the municipal ID cards, which I think was a positive thing for many Latino communities. That's in addition to obviously the universal pre-K, which Camille mentioned, and you as well, Lucia. outside of that, I'm not too optimistic when I think about de Blasio's legacy. I mean, the way I measure things is by his initial goal, which I thought was really unrealistic. Of his initial message was about this tale of two cities, right? And how do we disentangle that reality, right? That discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots, which, by the way, wasn't unique to de Blasio, right? I mean, we have Freddie Ferrer saying the same thing in 2005. But when I think about that, right, I'm like, well, I'm not so positive about the legacy, because when I look at the Latino community, even when it comes to the poverty levels among our folk, it is baffling that 8 years in now to his administration, and yet a recent Columbia study with Robin Hood says that over a quarter of Latino families are living in poverty, and 3/4 of Latinos in New York face material hardship. Then when we look at his other initiative, the affordable housing initiative, a Princeton study says that a third of Latino families, they pay up to the gazoo on, just to pay rent. So in fact, they say that about half of the income for a third of Latino families go to pay rent. So what does that say about de Blasio's legacy, when his one of his key focuses is to enhance our everyone's right ability to afford to stay in New York, but our Latino community hasn't really benefited from that. So I'm not so optimistic. And now that he runs for governor, I don't know why he's doing that, but
the same reason why he ran for president. I am just baffled at the power of this. If it's white, it's right. Apparently, it still seems to resonate in many ways in the same fashion. When I was doing advocacy, it was sort of like, it was like the good government white groups. Then more Latinos started getting engaged with good government groups, and they're all good government, amazing stuff that happens, and yet the impact and the starch negative impact that it has on people of color when we implement these great master democracy plans within all forms of government is a little baffling, right? I mean, Camille, you spoke about Tale of Two Cities, right? And Eli, you spoke about it. Obviously, we all, those of us that were around, we know Freddie spoke about it. And the moment Freddie spoke about it, it was like everyone attacked Freddie for having said, that there was that kind of separation. It was sort of like being a separatist, right? Like, oh, Latinos always are talking about their issues. They're always separating us. It's like, hold up. If there isn't a disparity, then there's no need to raise it, right? No one's going to be, no one will raise the alarm. But when we saw the disparities in COVID deaths, we saw it within worker organizations, we saw it within communities of color, then, I don't know. I realized people notice that things are not that great, folks, right? Like, you can talk the talk, but in your actions and implementation, there's a lot of ways that we need to hold our electeds accountable. But at the same time, what kind of things do we need to do on the ground to build up the power to hold them accountable? Not just, let's say, voting, because at the end of the day, you're choosing the lesser of many evils, right? I think everyone felt some of that angst when they went out to vote this time around for mayor. In many instances, the choices are presented to us, but not necessarily the greatest of choices that would possibly impact or have the best ideas or present the best platforms and feasible scenarios. I do notice a stark difference, though, and maybe we should pivot, because we know that there's so many things we're upset at in terms of the big vision de Blasio painted, huge vision that he painted. I mean, come on. We were in how many of those meetings that we set up in 2013, right before him was
transition stuff. It had been it was something through Soros and others that put it together. Yeah.
And I remember we talking transitions. I remember being on a couple of those, And it was so impressive downtown by the old 32BJ building off of Canal Street. I was like impressed by the listening, the diversity of panelists that were, the pooling of different people together to talk about, a new vision for the city. All the fanfare that we hoped today we would be able to reflect back and say what happened, what took place in those transitions. I'm dying to take a look back at those conversations because some recommendations came out of those. And then where are we now, right? And you can't cloud his entire tenure, because we did see universal pre-K. Yes, we did see Mooney IDs, and that was very advocate driven. I feel like there was a lot of contradictions. As you provide folks IDs, then you wanted to move in other directions on other things. I think affordable housing was a complete flop.
No, it was a complete disaster, and they
the whole rezoning,
out all the community organizations that they brought in to become elected, right? I mean, they iced out all these groups that helped them lift them up from the left cred, and then brought in people from private sector to be able to manage housing because they wanted profit. They wanted their cake and eat it too. And I think you hit it right on the nail. I mean, like the nail on the head. I mean, I think there is real problems, right? I mean, we cannot sugarcoat all of his tenure, right? Like there were real problems. I mean, the issues on incarceration, Rikers Island, solitary confinement that took so long for them to do. I mean, my cousin died during the years of his space in solitary confinement, right? There is, there's so much, even on the homelessness stuff. I mean, I'll give me a day so I can talk to you like exactly all these various spaces where we were literally chasing our tails in limbo, and we had numbers go down, and you had Black and Latino, deputy commissioner, and people who were working on this and the numbers, and we had the solutions, and the solutions were ignored. And then there was a new white, commissioner for social services, right? Nobody really talks about that transition, and so there are a lot of flaws and cracks within the administration. And I think obviously we want to try to see the good instead of the bad at the end of the year. But I do think I agree entirely with my colleague's assessment about how the Latino community, the Black and Brown community has not actually thrived as much as everybody thinks. And we do need to address it and what's to come in the new year. And I think, Lucia and I were on a text thread earlier, and I was like, I can't deal with any more moaning. I was like, I was like, we need to take action. And I think one of the pieces are like, what is the next step here in order to kind of build out what we want to see for the Latino community, and move forward.
I mean, Eli, if you want to like shed some light, like what are we not seeing that perhaps we saw? And again, maybe if we don't see it, maybe we don't want him to do everything, that took place 8 years ago, right? Because obviously it went to crap when we did the talking transitions, but people felt heard and they felt like they were involved essentially in the start of his administration. As Camille stated, he started off one way and then he definitely steered off and ventured into so many other directions. But, what are we looking at in terms, how is Adam kicking off, the month of December to begin to trigger, some notions of what's to come in 2022?
The first thing I'm looking at is representation, right? And when it comes to the Latino community, I'm sorry to get you emotional, Lucia, but I'm going to mention our old good friend Angelo Falcon, who always kept an eye on our folk being represented properly within government, right? So the first thing I'm looking at is, are we being represented properly? Because I've always believed that our government should reflect our people, right? So, and the fact is that almost a third of New York City is Latino, right? Brown folk. I mean, how would that be represented within government? So I believe that Adams has so far appointed 14 people, and 3 of those 14 are Latinos, right? With the last 2 being appointed yesterday. All transportation, one of them, Idanis Rodriguez, outgoing councilman, or soon to be outgoing councilman, who will be the head of the Department of Transportation. So, I'm looking at that. How is that going to be reflected in terms of Latino representation? I think that should be important for us. We need folks there that understand our plight and what to do about it, and to be able to advise the mayor properly.
Yeah.
I guess to some degree, this thought of representation, right? And I want to go back to something Camille said, and I want to piggyback on what you just said, Eli, about, government should reflect our communities. And immediately, Camille said, well, what's the ideology and what's the messaging that our community, like, is everyone really feeling that, right? Because you'll get messaging on one side that says, I want someone who's going to get the job done, right? Someone who's qualified, who has the experience, who will take us to the next level, right? And then we're like, well, hold up. Let's not, we have diversity in all those fronts, right? We have people from all walks of life who can do that. They don't, they could be Latino, they could be African-American, they could be Asian. I think when we talk about, government needing to reflect, then we go back and we say immediately, like, does everyone fall? Like, does everyone believe that, right? Like, how can we all know that if government doesn't reflect the community, then voices at the table making public policy, right? Like, let's take that representation argument and break it down a little bit, right? So Camille, can you break it down, right? Because if I tell people government should literally reflect either gender, right? Because people start taking representation to a whole level, right? And then, obviously race and ethnicity, right? If we're going to have a representative government that has different voices at the table, what does that even mean? And why is it important to have a good narrative around that, where communities believe that's important? Because I don't think everyone does.
Yeah, and I bet you if you polled everybody right now, like there's some poll about Latinos and how they're feeling about Eric, I bet you his poll numbers are fine. Right? I bet you it's just the kind of the class of the, we would call our champagne class of political operatives at this point, reeling, right? At the same time, though, us reeling, there is something brewing, right? And sooner or later, that catches up with regular folks who are buying their groceries and going onto the MTA and not seeing, because everybody wants to see the representation. Everybody wants to see, that's how, that, when they look, for example, at Parina Sanchez, who graduated from Harvard and is now a councilwoman, right? I'm happy to talk about Ivy Leagues and the problems with, education, but you know what? I know that my abuela would have been like, you know what? And my mother would be like, you see that girl, Camille? That girl went to Harvard. She was from the South Bronx, and she is look at her now. She's a councilwoman. All my kids can do that, right? So there is a connection between pride and ambition and goals that you want for your children. And what is the Latino word? Como una, oh God, my brain just went. I think it's post-COVID, but it's the feeling of pride, right? In orgullo, right, for your family. And I think that we don't connect the policy with the culture, right? It's the conversation and the debate that I have with Juan Benitez all the time, right? Which is, and I think, when we started 21 and 21, I was on this board understanding that we could actually gain a lot from having a whole bunch of women, right, coming together, not necessarily thinking about ideology, but the idea that if we elected enough women, that ideology would come together and come to fruition, right? But with Latinos, it has come with sacrifice, right? It has come with the idea that we have not done a good job in ensuring that the third of Latinos, and now potentially the additional 400,000 that are going to hopefully be eligible to vote, right, aren't harnessed to be able to decide who represents them. It is vital to have someone at the table who is Latino. It is vital to have someone who at the table who is African-American. We have an African-American mayor, right, who understands that history. And too many times you see a divide between Black and Latino about who's going to have more power versus who's other going to have the power. And people don't understand that, a whole bunch of fishes can defeat a larger space very quickly, right? It's you can create a coalition where we're representing everyone. Why can't his administration have 30% leadership and Latinos. How would that affect him in 4 years? You could very well see a Latino Republican or moderate or independent running against him and potentially winning, right? So, how do you actually, if I were him, I would be, getting out there and putting on more Latinos. And I know that he tried with Moya. I think that was just something that I believe was not necessarily very well thought out when you had 2 Latinas and, 3 women of color. You could have a Latina, right? We all know that the representation of women and Latina women, right, got paid all the way at the bottom and are not necessarily in the spaces of power. Lucia and I have been in the space, right, where we're all trying to fight for the space. And what we all realize now is like, oh my God, what if we're all together? Nobody can stop us, right? And so I truly believe and hope that he's hearing the message, right? Whether it's us, a little small consortium of people on Twitter saying that, right? And on the space, of how you're elevating that and that you're understanding that representation. If not, I think he's going to be at a loss. And his administration is going to begin at a level that he does not just want, right? You can't just appoint everybody who loved you. You have to appoint the people that are going to help you get to where you need to be, which is you do want to be there for 8 years, not 4. So, I mean, I'm talking a lot, but I do believe that if there isn't a switch in that, people are going to start to notice on their own, right? And there's going to be a change and a switch about how he's doing. And, media will start to create that divide. And why create that divide when you could just be very diverse? And it can't just be men, Latino men, no offense, Eli, but it can't just be, there's got to be other faces.
Camille, let's and then Eli, I want you to respond to this, right? But let's be open, right? First of all, for those that don't know, 21 and 21 was an organization that was created, right, to elect more women into the city council, because at a certain turning point, 2017, women decrease in the number of council women, and they weren't proportional to the number of women in the city, right? And so the need to have more female voices for a lot of different reasons was critical, right? Fast forward, 21 and 21 did such an amazing job at messaging that, right? We start with that discussion around the narrative, right? And the presenting the vision and the ideology that representation matters. And I think that resonated. Women, and by the way, it wasn't just the ideology, right? 21 and 21 did outreach, started to engage women, started to assist women in running for public office, started to provide them some of the nuts and bolts that, the champagne class has readily available for their ideal candidates, right? That being said, 21 reached their goal, right? We have 29, I think that's the number, right? 29 women coming into this city council. And the reality is that we have, 13 or 15 is between that number, Latinos joining the city council. I think there's that magic number. But Eli, what can the Latino community do, right? Aside from champagne class on Twitter, right? Because, Camille started having the discussion around what happened with the speaker's race. The speaker is the individual that pretty much runs the city council, dictates what comes to the floor of the city council to be heard as legislation. The non-champagne class don't understand all that, right? This was a lot of open public conversation that took place on New York One, took place in all the, mass media centers around who will become the face of the city council. And a lot of folks were arguing it should be a woman, it should be a Latina because of, our numbers. And we end up, now getting Adrienne Adams, who is an African-American woman. She's a woman, right?
And the first African-American woman, right?
And the first African-American woman from Southeast Queens. And, there was a lot of discussion around that it needed to be a Latino. In this case, there was a discussion that it needed to be any kind of Latino, a male or female. And in this case, at the end, it was more about one particular man, which was Councilmember Moya from Queens, of which Eric Adams was really, going out of his way to ensure, trying to make him the candidate of choice for all the council members. Eli, what happens in terms of what can the average person say or do or think about what just transpired? What was the final outcome? What was the feeling? What's the takeaway for Latinos?
Like Camille said, I think there are certain things that the political class pushes, and then you have Doña Juana and Don Juan, right? Which They have a different emphasis, right? They want to make sure there's bread on their table. They want to make sure that Con Ed is paid. They want to make sure rent is paid, right? So, but like Camille said, eventually things translate into, right, the at the ground level. I think right now people just need to pay attention, and I'll go back to this representation issue because I'm feeling some type of way right now. Like, I mean, just think about it. That we have. I mean, there is an increase in the city council in terms of Latino representation, but when we look at the leadership, and we look at citywide leadership, and not just at the municipal level, but at every level, Latino representation is failing. We don't have. I mean, look at this, Lucia. At the beginning of the show, you mentioned Antonio Reynoso, who is the only borough-wide Latino now in a borough that's not Latino majority, right? So we look at the Bronx, which is the only Latino majority borough in the city of New York, but yet we have no more. We don't have a Latino borough president. That's now Vanessa Gibson. Oh, it will be come January 1st. We don't have a Latino county leader in the Bronx. The district attorney borough-wide is not Latino or Latina. So I'm like, what's happening, right? So there is a representation issue. So I would say, listen, let's pay attention. And for those that say, well, this should be about who's more qualified. Well, I'll respond by saying, listen, we have plenty of folk that's plenty qualified. So the issue here is not about ability or qualification. The issue here is, simply put, is about representation. And so I think we really need to pay attention. To go back to Camille's point, I think the Adams administration needs to really pay attention to that, especially now with the ability of 400,000 additional voters being on the voter rolls. Listen.
Elaborate. Feel free to elaborate, right?
Yeah.
In particular, and please give me a minute so that I can talk through Laurie Cumbo.
All right. So let's talk about this, right? Yes. Let's talk about this. Like, recently, Idanis Rodriguez was carrying a bill, right, with multiple other council members, including Francisco Moya, right, Council Member Moya, who was a strong advocate of the immigrant right to vote, right? The not undocumented, the permanent resident and those individuals with visas, right, are entitled to, based on the law, to vote in upcoming municipal races, right? Municipal races, council member, mayor, citywide races, come the next cycle of races. So that will be 2023. In the next council race, we'll have redistricting happen, and then we'll have brand new city council races in 2023. We will not have mayoral citywide races until 2025. But by that time, we would have already implemented, and that is, of course, if there aren't these huge lawsuits that will stop it. Camille, talk to me. Like, what did we see? And then just some highlights, right? Aside from this passing, right, with a majority of the members, we heard a lot of interesting things come out of the mouths of our outgoing council members around, the immigrant vote, around a lot of things. So feel free to
I definitely want to go into this. Lucia knows this, how I'm feeling about it. Number one, I would love to just also the New York City Immigration Coalition, one of their leaders, not just Murad, who is a Muslim and leadership in the space, but a Black African American man, Theodore Moore, was one of the leads in this campaign and was just head on, right? It was a campaign that people said wasn't legal. They said there was all these biggest issues in municipalities. It took almost 7 years for this to actually pop. It took a very long time towards the end, and it finally got done. I was surprised that it got done. And the vitriol on the floor of the city council during that vote was something that I could not even understand. We had African-American leaders basically saying that this would push Latino voters to Trump, to the right, It said allowing immigrants to have more power, right, would create some sort of divide. That Black and Latino history is so much more different. When we all know the history of the diaspora and the history of the triangle trade, basically landed in places like Puerto Rico, rich port, right? 20 years actually. That's right. You are correct. You are correct. And just the audacity, right, of the talking points that were used about the fear of losing power, right? And again, there was others, even though the statistics basically said that it's not just going to help, that the second largest population were Jamaican, right? African immigrants that would be able to vote in this elections, in these municipal elections. And so the first thing we're starting to see now, right, which is, how everybody talks about caste and power, is the idea that when one group has power, the other one doesn't have to have power. And that is how white oppression is created, right? That is the overall model. You divide and you conquer, right? You do not give power, right, to the people, and to, you divide that and you create those dynamics, and then white suppression, oh God, I can't speak today, but white supremacists and white privileged power continues to be won. And I think one of the pieces here is that I don't think we're going to be in this space for forever, Lucia. I think that there is going to be an increase of voters, because the one thing that everyone cherishes is immigrants, right? My aunt, who came from Ecuador, and she pledged to be a U.S. citizen. The first thing she did was register to vote, and how proud she was to go out actually and pull that lever to be able to say, look at the power. I pay taxes, I've washed floors, I've worked so hard. I now have a say in my government. And so I think now is the time for us as Latinos to put aside, even though, I'm a lefty brat, right? To put our sides and actually think about, how do we build power for Latinos? How do we bring power for Latinos, Latinx community, right? That represents the 30%, the third of our city, right? And who will probably represent more. And I think that starts now, right? I think we have to, to your point, Eli, around qualification, right? We have a lot of people in government who are not that qualified, right? It's kind of like the biggest voice and the biggest vote. I think we have to do better here, and I think we can. And I think I would like to celebrate January as the start of that kind of campaign about how we think about Latinos in government again.
Yeah, and one, aside from us reflecting, I absolutely want to put a, kind of plug in for anyone who's watching and everyone who's, feeling the angst, both the champagne class, but then, our workers, right? That every single day are trying to chug away at trying to make ends meet, right? And you put up some of the data, right? And you mentioned some of the, the 25% and the 75% just trying to make ends meet. And the reality is that I want to ask everyone to take a moment and reflect, not just reflect, but then reflect and then take a moment, because the next step is to take action on something, say something about something, right? Pay attention to what are the number one things you need to pay attention to in the first 100 days, in the first 365 days in 2022, and hammer away at that, because there are ways that we can make change that doesn't require, 30% of Latinos being elected to city council, 30% of all appointments being Latinos, right? Like, there's a balance. We need representation to reflect the population because of a whole slew of reasons. We want people at the table. We want people being able to manage, the shops and the policies and implementations and the rulemaking and the whole nine. So representation does matter. And let's be crystal clear, that is not up for debate. But then there's so many other levels of ways that we need to be engaged and involved, right? And, I want to challenge the overall community, not just those of us that are thinking about this and getting annoyed by this every time we get on Twitter, right? Because Twitter space won't be where, policies get implemented. I mean, by the way, Erica, and Camille, and you said this, right? Because it just reminded me, you talked about solitary confinement, right? And let's be clear, like, just today, the mayor put a very strong message out there to 29 council members that signed on. Mayor-elect Eric Adams put a letter, the council members put a letter out there, 29 of them asking him to reverse his thoughts on solitary confinement. And he basically said, I'm going to ignore that. You never wore a cop suit. You were not a police officer. You never did that for 22 years. Therefore, I'm going to literally ignore it.
There's scientific data. There's actual data that proves that basic solitary confinement doesn't work, and that it actually puts pressure mentally on low-level offenders, not violent criminals, right? Like, he's ignoring already his own data.
Okay,
right?
But who do we remember like that? Anybody remember who was like
I don't know, but it was a Black young kid who got arrested for a backpack and stood 2 years in prison,
right,
in solitary confinement, and then committed suicide. Right? We know it was Akeem Browder. And so, but
I'm just saying, I spent 2016 or the end of 2016 crying, right, over what happened with our presidential election, and then spent almost 4 years listening to, the president of the United States ignore facts and ignore data and just go on his merry way, just kind of, bull in a china shop, just doing what he thought was right, or what he thought, period. I don't know if he thought it was right. He just didn't consider many factors, or he did on a very siloed focus, right? And, what is this telling us about the kickstart? I just kind of feel like you're already saying you're going to ignore, and I looked at that list of 29, and we're not talking about, random 29. These are pretty strong. Love to say we got a very interesting class, very confident that we're going to see very sharp tongues coming out of our incoming class. And I don't know. Eli, what do you anticipate would be, what's one thing you think? Obviously public safety seems to be high up there in the list, but do you think there are going to be any other controversial issues that we may be seeing the city council butt heads with the mayor?
I think we're going to see a lot of tension between the mayor and the council. And it seems that the mayor is already setting the tone, right?
29 is not a little number.
No, it's not. No. It's actually a veto. No, actually 30.
Yeah.
31 is veto.
No, yeah. It's over half, right? So it is a significant number. But
definitely not veto proof. You're correct.
Well, 36. It's not. It's 36. I can't remember my brain. Yeah. 36. One of these days, the COVID cloud will go away.
but still, not veto proof. But still, 29 is still a significant number of people asking him in unilateral fashion, like, this is not working. And communities have been. And by the way, the outgoing speaker did nothing to put that bill on the floor, right, to ensure that not having solitary confinement was a thing. So for for mayor-elect to reverse a decision that was a policy decision, right, was kind of a little backwards. But then worse, that the sitting council wasn't able to do anything about it either.
And by the way, Lucia, and I'll say, as you say that, I think of something. I'm wondering what the incoming speaker, what she's going to do, and not just on this issue, but on all other issues. Because she has to contend with a lot, right? She has a caucus that, that some that are very, very progressive, very strong-minded, not in a bad way, right? But they're certain about where they stand, and they want certain things to be done. So I'm wondering what incoming Speaker Adams, how is she going to push back, if she's going to push back on these critical issues against the incoming mayoral administration. So I'm wondering what that dynamic is going to be. But we already seen a certain temperament and tone on the part of the mayor-elect. I'm just wondering, listen, is a speaker willing to push back? Right? I don't know about that.
I think I recall sitting down with her once, and she said to me, and she said, I would be the first, mother to be speaker, as a mom and as a woman. And it just immediately gets in my head, and there's a certain skill set, I'm sorry, that comes with being a parent, that have, to manage. And in some ways, let's be real, we know that there's going to be, council members, not even the new ones, I would say, probably the sitting ones, that you're going to need to treat like a child, like manage them like that bratty teenager. We're going to see a whole sharper, right in terms of the Republicans that, don't have a majority at all, by no means, a huge caucus, but, they're going to make noise and, squeaky wheel, right? I'm just curious, like, I think she would do, I mean, I don't know, Camille, you may want to add to this. I mean, I kind of feel like.
I think I'm not quite sure, right? I can't speak. I know that she's been a moderate, right, for quite some, I do know that COBA did sponsor her speaker event in Somos, right? Like, I don't know, right? I do hope she, the speaker is also about like collaboration. You cannot just, it's not the old days of the Malone style speakership many years ago where you just held your ground and you held people. With term limits and re-election spaces, there is a real accountability here that performs, that gives a space for people to actually have a voice. And it's a hard thing to manage. And you've got 29, that's not hard to get to 36. And I think that, she's going to have to manage a very wild and like ideology, whether it's ideology or just wanting to pound your chest and say, hey, I'm here as a new council member and I want to make my mark. I do think, if we're going to be entirely honest, I don't know who's not going to say, like, the mayor-elect really had an egg on his face with regards to the speaker's race, right? Whatever advice or movement that actually happened, there was a real space here where he was trying to put upon an elected official that the colleagues did not want, right? And putting the Latino issue aside, people don't like to be told what to do, right? People like, whether or not, it's particular if you haven't built up your capital yet, right? And so I think that he will find that there will be resistance in how he governs if he doesn't govern the right way. And if he wants to bring in, his speech was about bringing everyone together. You can't say I want to bring everyone together, but then I don't want to deal with the progressives, because those progressives represent poor Black Latino communities.
Who have to run in 2 years, by the way.
And he's got to run, and then they have to run in 2 years. What is he not going to clean the streets in Bushwick and in Astoria, Queens?
Which,
right?
By the way, people are scared of, right? Like, some of the biggest fears, and this is sad, right? Like, to think that this could happen. Some of the fear is that if they don't go with the mayor, or they don't show, deference to the mayor, that somehow, they will get less resources for their community organizations, less resources for sanitation pickups, opportunities for new affordable housing developments. Like, crazy that the thought or the mindset is, oh, he'll find a way to jerk you over if you did not side with him or if you're causing him trouble. And I'm thinking, hold up.
That is so ass backwards, if I can curse here. Like, that is just, why? Because when the streets aren't clean, the first person they blame is not the council member, because the council member gets up to be able to say, well, the mayor didn't give me any money. I don't have any money. You need to call the mayor, right? When the streets are messed up and the snowplows aren't moving, when the trains aren't running, when a hurricane comes and things aren't clean and people are dying, they don't blame the council member. The council member is a space of resource and liaison. So he can create as many primaries as he wants. But I would be focused on governing rather than trying to win on primaries.
Yeah, this is already.
And here, and just to piggyback off Camille, I would say he should have been focusing more on the transition rather than an internal dynamic that has to deal with the legislative branch philosophically. And I critique de Blasio for doing the same thing when he put his thumb on the scale. Now, in this case, he did it for Latina, Melissa Mark Viverito, right? But philosophically, and I have to be consistent here, philosophically, I'm against the executive branch meddling into the legislative branch's business. For me, it's like, look, let the council members elect deal with their own thing. Let them pick their speaker, stay out of it. And like Camille said, a lot of egg on his face, and deservedly so, right? Deservedly so. Let's see. Maybe it'll be different we have a mayor-strong municipal government, but there's strength in numbers, right? Like, and again, I refer back to Camille. Camille said 39, 36, right? 20 from 29, that's not a lot, right? Just 7 more. There's strength in numbers. And again, I go back to the incoming speaker. She's gonna have I think she's gonna have a tougher struggle than her predecessors, because I think the dynamic in the council will be much different. With this progressive moderate divide, in addition to an incoming mayor that's going to be much more aggressive than de Blasio. So it's going to be interesting. We're going to be in for a ride the next 2 years.
I mean, we're definitely not going to get the wishy-washiness that we got from de Blasio. I mean, let's be real. He was like an appeaser, right? Like, he liked to be liked type of thing. And I'm hoping we're not going to repeat the, showing up late all the time, like tons of leaking of things, like not showing up to speak to the press, like just tons of things that I hope we do not repeat, that de Blasio did. That I have a feeling Eric is going to be, the mayor is going to be much more open about his things, probably much more opinionated, less wishy-washy, but not sure if that's all positive, right? But let's see. There's a lot. I mean, I would tell you that there's a lot. This is going to be an exciting 2022. I am looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to all of it on Twitter. I'm just looking forward to all of it, in implementation. Climate is, we're going to have real climate change issues, creeping into people's day-to-day lives. And like, Camille, you said, like, got to respond to, the flow, the water, right?
If he's not making a sustainability plan, he's failing right now. Right.
Like, by the way, which we have not seen, right? Like, let me just be clear. It's not, I would say environmental, climate change, Latinos is not like on the top of our kitchen table list of things to talk about, right? Like, I still have little criticisms from the little one here in my house, who not that little anymore, but basically tells me every time I'm got to recycle the water bottle or the cartons or little things. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't go there. That's it. She goes, since when do we recycle like that? I'm like, dude, we've been living here for like 3 years. We recycle here. So, but it's interesting because it's not the Latino conversation, but guess who gets negatively impacted the moment some crap like that happens, where we have our basements overflowing? Black, Latino, Asian communities that can't afford above ground apartments and, 4-story high buildings, right? 20-story high buildings. Like, we can't afford to live in some of those spaces. And so the reality is that we're being negatively impacted. I do foresee, many of our communities do believe in strong law enforcement, right? Like, there is a very strong, so both the left and, more moderates, someone's watching and listening and taking advantage to push back against some of the policies that we believe to be more progressive, because it does negatively impact our communities, right? One thing is for my mom to be like, she loves to see a cop in the corner because somehow she feels safer.
Yeah, no, we lost that mark, right? Progressives did not do a good job in communicating to Latinos and Black communities about why we should be defunding the police, right? We should be open about the critique, right? Sometimes it's hard for us to receive that, right? As a progressive, be like, what do you mean? Why? People get very upset with me sometimes, but I know Mama Rosa doesn't want her grandson to be shot. I know that she goes outside and she says when she's, but then she also says, I also don't want to be attacked, in my car. My mother basically says, Mommy, sometimes I don't want to go outside because I'm afraid that I'm going to get attacked. And I'm hearing that other elderly are getting attacked. So I do want safety. Right. And so when you figure out fear, you play on that fear, and that creates, what we have. And
for all of us, safety means police, right? For the traditional sense, safety means more police officers, except, having more of the off-duty police officers over in DC, during the January 6th coup wasn't necessarily the most positive way, but no one stopped to think about the conundrum there, right? When we're like empowering law enforcement all that ever more than we empower ourselves as a community to talk up, right? To, get together with our communities. I'm saying, go to your community boards, right? I'm saying, speak to your neighbors. Think about, your building associations, right? If you don't have one, get it, a little club amongst your friends, like whatever the case is. I just feel like it's going to be both a year. It's going to be a couple of, we have about a week to reflect on 2021, but we're going to have to kick into action in 2022. And so at a minimum, we did talk about representation. I want to just say that and hopefully we can put up your emails, Camille, and emails to Eli, because I know we've been trying to take inventory, right?
Yes, we have.
Serving in public government, in public service in our governments, they're not these like sexy jobs, right? You're not the chair and CEO of a huge, enterprise, probably not the most lucrative, but they make pretty good money. I'm just putting a plug for folks to send us information if you want to engage at that level, right? If you consider yourself to have a certain skill set, if you want to be involved, if you want to be engaged, and you happen to be Latino. And the reason why I say the Latino is because we're trying to be able to know who this class of individual that wants to be involved and changing society from the perspective of government, right? From taking and getting the public service experience. And so, Camille, you have your email up there. Go ahead, Eli, if you want to put your email up there so folks can see it. I mean, I definitely want to invite folks to reach out to let us know, what it is that you want to see happen, maybe even in helping us shape, a Latino agenda, both 2022. And this is more about tracking data, right? Because I think Eli started off like, I'm curious to see, what did census tell us, our communities, how they were faring. I want to know how many of them graduated from four-year colleges or even got into CUNY's four-year colleges. I want to know how many of them, are living below the poverty line, above the poverty line. What is the poverty line? What's the median income, right? Like, we have that data readily available, and I'm curious about all our nonprofits and nonprofit advocacy groups. Start putting that info out. I want to know what, how successful you've been in the last 8 years under the de Blasio administration, and what you're looking forward to in the next coming, government, because we have to do this with everyone, right? It can't just be, and I love it, Camille, the champagne class, right?
I mean, these are champagne problems when we're up there, but then when it starts to figure out that it affects actual like equity, people start to really think about it,
Yeah, absolutely. And so, definitely, I want to thank both of you. Listen, this is not going to be the last time. So thanks, Camille. I know
it was so much fun, and it was a pleasure.
It gets a vent.
It was a nice venting space considering all that. It was a pleasure to see you in person, Eli. It's great.
All right, thank you so much, and happy holidays. Yes. Thank you, Eli. Please stay safe, and till the next one. Absolutely.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.